And welcome to the Oddity Archive, the show that compresses and expands so rapidly that we're a perpetual 15 minutes behind the rest of the world. Ain't that always the way with us? Anyway, speaking of compression and expansion, that just so happens to be the crux of today's episode. Yeah, who'da thunk it? Anyway, you've heard of Dolby noise reduction, right? You know, the system that's been used on, like, damn near every pre-recorded audio cassette since sometime probably in the mid-70s. Well, today we're going to take a look at a system that was intended to compete with Dolby, but only ever got adopted by just a handful of audio geeks, and not for very long either. So with that, let's close out 100% show tune free Musical March with a look at the DBX noise reduction system. In the late 60s, Dolby Labs introduced the first significant noise reduction system intended for consumer use. This was known as Dolby B. In a nutshell, Dolby B was eventually mostly implemented on audio cassettes and, shock of shocks, cassette decks. This system could filter out around 9 dB of noise, and in my opinion also manages to take out around 9 dB of music with it. Opinions aside, for all intents and purposes, Dolby B has managed to stick, remaining the most common standard in consumer analog noise reduction. In 1971, DBX Incorporated founder David Blackmer came up with the DBX Types 1 and 2 noise reduction system. Unlike Dolby, which was usually built into tape decks, DBX units were usually standalone boxes. Also like the Dolby setup, which would compand, read, compress, and expand a signal, DBX would do the same, but would take it to far greater extremes in its effort to reduce, if not eliminate, noise from audio recordings, as well as expand the dynamic range, in the decibel sense. Unlike Dolby recordings, which could be played with little to no issue regardless of what gear you play the recordings on, DBX used such an extreme companding method, a solid 2-to-1 and back-to-2 ratio, that any recordings made using the DBX system were borderline useless without one of the units. The DBX noise reduction units were initially intended for your own tape recordings. Read, there were no DBX encoded pre-recorded titles at first. Around this time, Dolby was starting to hitch its wagon to pre-recorded cassettes. Perhaps in response, DBX figured that they could hitch theirs to vinyl? Who knows? Anyway, starting around 1973, DBX took a few stabs at some DBX-encoded LPs, which were never issued publicly. Starting in 1974, DBX was able to get a precious few classical and jazz recordings out the door. Unsurprisingly, this didn't exactly encourage many people to buy the decoders or discs. It took until about 1978, and only after getting bought out, for DBX to start issuing some major label albums using their technology. To make DBX encoding on vinyl worthwhile, they had to resort to mastering the albums only from the original master tapes and then press them to heavy, high-quality vinyl stock. Thing was, in 1977, Mobile Fidelity Sound Labs introduced its line of half-speed mastered, original tape mastered, pure vinyl stock audiophile LPs, which didn't need any special gear to play the discs. Like the Mobile Fidelity discs, DBX encoded LPs cost anywhere from 2 to 5 times the amount as a standard LP, meaning that in the end, thanks to the necessary decoders, which started at about $200, DBX still came out well behind in terms of cost. As a bit of trivia, as best as I can tell, there were no legit pre-recorded DBX cassettes issued. Every DBX cassette I found looks more than a little dubious. Okay, stick with me here. Let's step back to 1975 for a bit. Now, early that year, Steely Dan was working on their Katie Lied album, which was to be one of, if not the first album recorded and mixed using DBX encoding. The system proved to be more than a little unreliable, causing their mixes to seemingly inexplicably turn to sonic mud before the album could be mastered. What had happened was that their DBX unit wasn't encoding and decoding the same way, leaving them with would-be master tapes that could never be played properly. To add insult to injury, when they went back a year later to take another stab at one of the album's outtakes, the multi-tracks were no longer reading properly either. What I'm getting at here is that when the DBX system gets something wrong, it's really wrong. And that's the main complaint I tend to see when reading about DBX encoding/decoding. Case in point, DBX encoded recordings are often criticized for some audible, if you will, breathing during playback. This is a byproduct of all the companding going on. Anyway, finally getting back on track, between the artifacting and the standalone equipment, it probably shouldn't come as any shock that DBX never caught on. The last DBX LPs were issued in 1982, with the overall system being phased out over the next few years. On a happier note, in the years since, DBX has managed to successfully reinvent itself as a maker of professional-grade EQ units and compressors and stuff. Prior to this episode, I'd already found a DBX 122 unit. I'd imagine it dates to about 1979. Anyway, despite everything looking good about this unit, it has one major fault. The right channel is constantly overdriven, and not by choice. In other words, the right channel is always way too hot, to the point of serious distortion, no matter how low the sound level. Figuring someone had, screwed around with the thing, I opened the unit up to look for any signs of foul play, and despite one of the main record level controls being very badly bent backwards, nothing looked amiss. Anyway, I found that there were 8 dials, each controlling some aspect of recording or playback. After checking the wiring as best as I could, and spending half a day fiddling with these levels, despite maybe getting things stable for a minute or so, in short order, the right channel would start overloading again. I'm calling this a circuitry issue, and one that I am not qualified to fix.
I am not in love, but I'm open to persuasion. Make love with affection. Sing me the love song, but this time with a little dedication. Sing it, sing it, sing it, sing it.
As you can see, I have acquired a second DBX unit, which is this DBX 228, and I think it dates to about 1982. I just can't seem to find anything too definitive on that. But I believe this is one of the last, and also one of the higher end, if not the highest end, of the consumer level DBX units. Now, unlike the last unit, which was a very basic one, this one adds in some goodies. So, first off, we've got this thing that claims to be a stereo expander, but all it seems to do is squish stuff, going in or out, down to borderline mono. So, like, if this were the stereo image, the more I turn it up, the more it tightens it up. And you'll see, I'll turn up the slider, all the decrease lights will start coming on. But anyway, when used in tandem with this transition level slider, it just seems to reset what the machine interprets as, for lack of a better term, the unity level, the level at which the machine is triggered into doing its thing. So I'll have to throw in a taste of that a little later on. Anyway, aside from that, this thing is pretty straightforward. Well, so long as you avoid the manual like the plague. The manual for this thing, which I found online, is one of the absolute most confusing, poorly written things I have ever encountered, but I'm off track. Because this thing sends signal both ways, you've got switches for monitoring from either your stereo or whatever record device. So source or tape / whatever recording device. I know there's no lights there, but I thought I'd try it anyway. And in tandem with that tape button, you've got the tape switch to enable DBX on whatever record device. And then, of course, more famously, you've got the DBX disc decode button, which is a one-touch factory setting sort of thing. But with the tape one, you can control the recording and playback levels to your own needs. But anyway, let's, of course, you can also hit the bypass button and just not worry about this DBX crap at all. Anyway, let's take a cut here and let's take a look at the back. I know I'm at a pretty long distance here, but in the center, hopefully you can see those 3 little blue knobs. And those are volume levels that you can adjust with a small flathead screwdriver. And this is so that the volume is consistent when you're using or not using the DBX signal. So that is nice to have, I'll give it that much. But there's one thing, and this is going to sound kind of silly, but one thing that just irritated me to no end. So you'll notice we have 4 sets of phono jacks here, and I am so used to just a basic input, output, input, output, that the little sentences that I know are unreadable from here, they just threw me really badly. So, for example, under this first one, it says, from preamp tape output. So, in other words, this is the input to this machine, the input to the box. And you see what I'm getting at here? So, unsurprisingly, when I was jockeying around 4 sets of cables, trying to read the back of this thing, I'm running to and from up to 3 devices at once. So, say maybe I was copying a CD to cassette while trying to monitor the whole thing through my stereo, it would just throw me, and it would just frustrate the living hell out of me. So, big thumbs down to the labeling on here. But anyway, I thought you'd like the usual tour. If you remember early in the episode, I mentioned that there were 2 types of DBX noise reduction, Type 1 and Type 2. Now, as best as I can tell, all the consumer DBX units are Type 2, so, the ones with the disc decoders. But anyway, it looks like Type 1 was intended for use more in professional settings and was intended to be used with high-speed tape stuff, so stuff that runs at 7.5 inches per second or more. I don't have any Type 1 stuff, so I can't test it. But I do have the Type 2, and the Type 2, according to the manual, is intended to be used as an encoder with just slow tape stuff, like a normal old cassette. And so I have done just a test with a real cheapy bottom of the barrel Type 1 cassette, but I figured, well, I still got the reel-to-reel out from the last episode, although I'm still missing those parts that I was looking for. Anyway, I figured well, what the hell. I'll do a little test at 15 inches per second just to see if the decoder can handle it. So anyway, aside from that, on a more copyright sensitive front, I have accrued a few DBX LPs, and I will play you some excerpts, but I'm going to have to keep them pretty brief and maybe even a bit choppy. But I got that going for me, and I've got 4 DBX LPs, 3 of which will be excerpted, and 2 of them are ones that I already owned on standard vinyl, and one of those was one that I also already had on one of those audiophile discs. So, we can do some real good compare and contrast here. Anyway, the one disc that I will not be excerpting, I just thought I'd show you real quick, is the Police's Zenyatta Mandata from 1981. And believe it or not, this is the first copy of this album I have ever owned, so I don't have anything to compare it to, and as such, in this context, I just don't think it's all that useful. But anyway, the one remaining DBX disc that I have not touched on, I got this one still sealed, and it's of some Tchaikovsky, and what you're going to hear is a little bit of the first ever play of this disc. So, we can hear DBX really at its best. Anyway, I got a lot of tests to get through here, so this is what I got.
I am not in love, but I'm open to persuasion. Make love with affection. Sing me another love song, but this time with a little dedication. Sing it, sing it, sing it, sing it. I am not in love, but I'm open to persuasion. Make love with affection. Sing me another love song, but this time with a little dedication. Sing it, sing it, sing it, sing it.
God knows that I love my music. Ain't no one gonna change my tune. God knows that I love
I tend to listen to a lot of my music through headphones, and this is where DBX really caused a problem, because I could definitely hear that breathing going on that I mentioned, especially during the quiet parts, and to the point where I found it kind of distracting. Now, through speakers, it's not so pronounced, and I guess if you're only ever gonna listen through speakers, then it's perfectly okay, I guess. It's not really for me, but I don't think it's too terrible. Anyway, as far as vinyl goes, I think I'm going to have to give my vote to the audiophile stuff, like the mobile fidelity stuff, as expensive as it is. Anyway, that's it for today's archive, and that's it for 100% Showtune Free Musical March. So sad to see it go. Anyway, join us next time when, well, if you saw the last episode, you know exactly what the next one is going to be about.